The Dutch government has accepted it was partially liable for the deaths of hundreds of Muslim men and boys killed at the hands of Bosnian Serb forces during the 1995 Srebrenica massacre. The Supreme Court of the Netherlands upheld an earlier ruling, paving the way for the payment of damages to the families of the victims. Hermione G has this report.
The judges found that Dutch peacekeepers could have allowed the men to remain at the UN safe haven compound. Instead, they turned them over to Bosnian Serb forces, who executed some 8,000 Muslim men and boys over a 3-day period.
The Dutch battalion deprived these male refugees of the chance of staying out of the hands of the Bosnian Serbs.
Zoals ook het Hof heeft geoordeeld, was dat...
As the appeals court ruled, that was wrongful because the Dutch troops knew the male refugees were in serious jeopardy of being abused and murdered, and that everything possible should be done to prevent this.
The court rejected a second charge the Dutch troops acted unlawfully in helping to remove the men from the base. Victims' relatives found little consolation in the verdict.
Nobody in this world can make what we had to go through go away. We are the living witnesses. We know what role the Dutch soldiers played and what they did. I know they could have saved people, including my son.
The massacre was the worst atrocity on European soil since the end of World War II. Several senior Bosnian Serb officials have been convicted of genocide at the UN Tribunal in The Hague. The ruling could set an international legal precedent for states' liability when they send troops to peacekeeping operations. It also paves the way for the payment of damages. The court set the Dutch state's liability at 10% of the overall loss, meaning survivors will likely only receive a few thousand euros.
Well, earlier I spoke to Thijs Bougnet, researcher at the Netherlands Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, about the significance of this ruling, and he told me it could potentially deter governments from around the world from taking part in future peacekeeping operations for fear of also being found liable of crimes committed under their watch.
I think for most part what countries who would send peacekeepers to conflict areas where there may actually be a fear of atrocity crimes would actually think twice before sending their peacekeepers to these specific areas, because in the end a court may actually rule that in the case that atrocity crimes actually happen, like genocide, that actually the state, the sending state in that case, can actually be held responsible over it and can also face claims of reparations by victims. So I think, yes, in the first place, countries would be more careful to send people in the first place. On the other hand, you could also argue that states may actually step up their activities in actually protecting people who are under the face of serious threat.
OK, so the Supreme Court said the liability of the Dutch state had 10% of the overall loss suffered. How did it come up with that figure, and how's that going down with the plaintiffs?
It is a bit of an awkward result of mathematics on atrocity crimes. And they basically ruled that for 10% the Dutch state was liable over the deaths of these 350 men. And the reason was that they perceived the situation as a whole, where the Dutch were perhaps a cog in a bigger machine of multiple actors, multiple factors, and also other events in which they played a part. So basically what the court said is that the Dutch were not the only ones who were responsible for the deaths of these people. And in that respect, they calculated it, that it's only 10%. Also, it actually disregarded or changed their finding in that respect, because the prior court, the courts of appeal, actually held that the state was responsible for 30%. Obviously, for the victims, this has quite some impact, because it affects the amount of reparations they can now start to claim from the Dutch state.